16 need to know JavaScript array methods. Now, when I say need to know, it's more so like need to know of these methods, as I have found all of these methods to be useful at some points in time during my professional career here. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I just have memorized how each and every one works all the time. It's just important to know of them. So it's like, okay, I think JavaScript has this Unshift method to where I can put elements on the front of the array. Let me just do a quick Google search of JavaScript Unshift to figure out the API of that method and figure out how it works a little bit more, and then I can use it. So you don't necessarily need to know specifically how each and every one of these work, but just knowing of these methods at different points in time can be very useful, okay? So we're going to kind of roll through 16 of them, but like I said, it's more important, I think anyways, to know of these methods and know kind of how they work, opposed to knowing the specific syntax and all of the different little nuances of these methods. All right, so first things first, I will cover map, filter, reduce, and sort in future videos in their own specific video, as those methods, there's a little bit more complexity to them that I want to kind of give them the time that I think they need to fully understand them a little bit better. So the first one we're going to cover here is array.push. And for array.push, it adds an element to the end of the array, and it actually returns the new array's length. So if you call this on an array, it will mutate the array that you call it on, and it will add whatever element you pass in to the .push method. All right. So if we run this code here, so I have my array of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I call .push on my array, as arrays are objects, and you can call these kind of helper methods for free on these array objects. If I push hey, the string hey, into my array, and I console log what this returns here, we're actually going to see the new length of this array. And then when I console log my array here on line 9, after I've already pushed hey, we're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, and hey. So if I go ahead and run this, you're going to see that my array.push, the return value that is 5, because the new length of this array is 5. And then when I console log my array on line 9, after I push the value, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, hey. So push adds an element to the end of the array, and it returns the new array's length. That is method number 1. Method number 2 is the pop method. So this kind of does the reverse of push, to where it removes the last element of the array and it returns that element. So if we look at a similar example here, I have my array of 1, 2, 3, 4. I call my array.pop and I log what that returns here. That's going to actually return the value of 4, because it pops the last element of the array off of the array and it returns that element. So one common thing to do here is to actually assign this to a value. So you could say const last value equals my array.pop, and that will assign the last value of the array that you called .pop on to that constant, because this will return that value. And then it does mutate this initial array, the original array. So this original array should have 1, 2, 3, and 4 in it. So as you can see, it first returns the value of 4, and then the array here has 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is the second method, that is .pop. It removes the last value of the array, it mutates the array, and then it returns that value. Now we have very similar methods, but for the front of the array, the start of the array. And these methods are going to be shift and unshift. So our third method is shift. It removes the first element of an array and it returns that element. So very similar to pop, but it works on the start of the array. So we have my array, 1, 2, 3, 4, my array.shift. This is going to return the first value of the array. I like to think about this as you shift things off of the front of the array. And then here in method number 4 is unshift. You unshift things onto the array. That's how I try to keep these straight, but I still confuse these all the time. But here, we're going to shift the first element off the array and return it, and then we mutate my array. So this should have 2, 3, and 4 when we're all said and done here. So as you can see, it returns the first value of the array here, and then we mutate the array to have 2, 3, and 4. So this call here returns the first element, and then the new mutated array has 2, 3, and 4 in it. And then for array number 4, this is the unshift method. You unshift an element onto the front of the array or to the start of the array. And similar to push, the return value for unshifting an element is going to be the new length of the array. So here I would expect this to return 5 as 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we add the 5th element there. And then the new array here will have 100, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I run this here, we see the first console log, the return value is 5, the new length of the array, and then the new array is 100, 1, 2, 3, 4 because we unshift the element onto the front of the array. Now, quick note on these, push and pop are going to be more efficient algorithms compared to shift and unshift because arrays in memory, if you just push and pop elements onto a dynamic array, it's going to happen in constant time. It's going to happen very quickly. But if you shift and unshift elements onto the front of the array, you actually need to reorder all of the indexes in memory, and that's going to take a little bit longer. Usually, you don't need to worry about this, but there are some kind of efficiency considerations to where pushing and popping does occur a little bit more quickly there, but most of the time, you don't need to worry about that. All right, so those are the first 4. Moving on to number 5, we have the slice method. So the slice method will copy the entire array or a specific portion of the array, and it will return a new array. So let me just look at these first 2 lines here. And then if we log out this new copy here, after calling .slice on my array, so we call .slice on my array, then we can log out the new copy, and we can see we get the exact same copy of this array. Now, the slice method can take a couple of arguments here. It can take the start and end index of the new array that you want. Now, the end index is exclusive, meaning you want to start at index 1, meaning you want that index in your new array. But for index number 3, that's where you're going to stop. You're not going to include index 3. So this sliced array here should include indexes 1 to 2. So it includes indexes 1 and 2. And then if you only pass one argument to .slice, then you are going to get from that index to the end of the array. So you're going to get starting at index 1, then the rest of the array if you only pass one index. So if I log out both of these here, and let me make sure I uncomment these, and then if you just call .slice with no arguments, it creates a whole new copy of the array and just copies the entire array. But if we look at skipping the first value, and then we look at the middle values here, and we run that, you can see that when I skip the first value, I get 2, 3, and 4. And then for the middle values, I get 2 and 3. So in my array, when I skip the first value, I start at index 1, and I want to slice the rest of the array. I get 2, 3, and 4. 2 is at index 1, that is inclusive. But then when I slice from index 1 to 3, I get index 2 here, which is inclusive. I get index 1 here, which is inclusive. And then I want to stop at index 3, and I don't want to include that. So I'm going to actually only get up until index 2. So that's why this console logs 2 and 3. And this creates a brand new copy of the array. If I log out my array here, after performing those slice operations, you're going to see that the array does not change. it's still 1, 2, and 3, 4, even after running these slice operations. Now, I can also use negative indexing for the slice method, in which if I pass in a negative number here, it's going to basically say, okay, starting at 2 indexes from the end of the array, give me that index. It's going to be inclusive in this case, but it would also be exclusive if I passed another value here. So -2 to -3 or to -1. And I'll show you that in a second. But here it's going to say, okay, starting at the second to last index of this array, give me the rest of the array starting at the second to last index. So if I log out, last 2, you're going to see I get the last 2 values. I get 3 and 4. And then if I pass in -1 here, that's going to be exclusive. So it's only going to give me the second to last value of this array, because I'm slicing -2 up until the last index of the array, but not including this last index. So if I run this, I only get 3. I get a new array containing the value of 3. So that is the slice method. If you don't pass any arguments, you just get a copy of the original array. If you pass 1 argument, you start at that index, including that index, and then it gives you the rest of the array. And then if you pass 2 indexes, it is inclusive and exclusive. So index 1, and then you pass in index 4 for the second argument. That's going to give you indexes 1, 2, and 3, excluding 4. So that is the slice method in JavaScript. And then you also have a similar one called Splice. And Splice is basically a way to replace value in the array. And the return value of the Splice method is the deleted items. And it also mutates the original array. So here, when I call myArray.splice, what this is saying is the first argument you pass is where you want to start your splice operation. So this is saying starting at index 1, and then the second argument you pass here is how many items you want to remove from this original array. So this is telling JavaScript here, starting at index 1, I want to replace 2 items. So at index 1 here, index 1, which has the value of 2, I want to replace 2 items. So this is saying I want to replace values 2 and 3 here. I want to replace index 1 and index 2. So starting at index 1, I want to replace 2 items. And then after that, you can pass as many values as you want to replace those items with. So this is saying get rid of, starting at index 1, get rid of the 2 values there, so 2 and 3, and then replace that with 100, 200, and 300. So if I run this, you're going to see that the return value of Splice is the values you remove. So I removed values 2 and 3 because I started at index 1 and then I removed 2 values. And then it mutates the original array and it replaces the 2 values I removed here with the values that I passed as these additional arguments. And I can pass as many arguments as I want here, and it will keep mutating this original array and adding these elements to that array. So if I run that, you see I get a new array with all these elements. So .splice, it mutates the original array. It returns the items that you are replacing or removing from the original array. And then starting at argument 3 here, you can pass as many arguments as you want to put in starting at this index right here that you started replacing items. So that is the .splice method. Then we have the index of method. It takes a value and returns the index of that value within the array. If that value does not exist in the array, it will return -1. So we have my array 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then here I use the index of method on the array object. I pass in the value of 3. So this is going to look through this array and it's going to find the value of 3 and it's going to return the index of that value. And if it doesn't find that index, it's going to return -1. Now it's going to return the first value it sees in this array. So if I have multiple 3s here, it's only going to return the first index. Now there's also a last index of method that works basically the same as index of, but it works in reverse. It's going to return the last index of a certain value in an array. So if I run this here, you can see that I get index 2 as 0, 1, 2. Index 2 is the value of 3. And then you can see that it does not mutate this original array here. So index of, you pass it a value and it returns the index of that value. But if I pass a value that doesn't exist in the array, you can see that it will return -1 as this value doesn't exist. We also have the includes method here for method number 8. It returns whether an array includes a certain value. So it returns true or false. So here, effectively what I'm doing is I'm calling .includes on this array object and I'm seeing, okay, does this array include the value of 2? And as we can see in my array, it doesn't include that. So we get true. It returns true or false whether it includes the value. It does not mutate the array. If I pass in a value that doesn't exist here, we can see that we get false. Okay, so .includes returns a true false value on whether an array includes the value that you pass in to the includes method. For method number 9, we have the concat method on arrays. And I know this is a lot of information, but like I said, you just need to know that these methods exist and have a high level overview of how they work. And then when you go to use them, you can dive into some of the more nuances of these methods. The concat method on the array, it's basically going to take an argument of additional arrays or even one array, and it's going to combine all those arrays together. So it creates a new combined array. It does not mutate the original array. So I call .concat on this original array here of 1, 2, 3, and 4. I pass in 2 arguments, an array containing 100, 200, and 300, and then a second array containing 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. And if I'm going to first clear my terminal, but if we run this, we get the new array as 1, 2, 3, 4, 100, 200, 300, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. But it does not mutate the original array. That stays 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can pass as many arrays here as you want, or you can just pass one array and it combines those arrays. Now, there's also other ways, and you can see it does it there. Now, there's also other ways to combine arrays that I actually think are a little bit simpler using the spread operator in JavaScript, but I will cover that in future videos. The 10th method is the join method. And effectively join, it will take an array and it will turn it into a string with some delimiter. So I'll explain what that means. So by default, join will turn in an array into a string of comma-separated values. So it's going to join these values together, and then it's going to, by default, just put commas between the values, and that comma is what you can think of as the delimiter. So if we run this, we see that the output of this is the string 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it does not mutate the original array. The original array stays the array of 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it logs out the string 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, you can pass whatever delimiter you want for an argument of this method here. So if I pass in the string of all these stars here and I run this, you're going to see that I get 1 star, 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 2, 3, 4, with these stars in between the numbers. So it's going to join these values with whatever delimiter you pass in. One common thing to do here is just to pass in an empty string. And then it basically just gives you a nice human readable output of this of 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4. Because it basically just replaces these commas of this array with whatever delimiter you pass in. And it does not mutate the original array. Method number 11 is flat. So flat, it flattens a nested array into a less nested array. So it removes the nesting of those array. It flattens those arrays into a less nested array. So here we can see in my array, I have an array that is 1, 2, and then for my third value of my array, it's actually an array that has values of 100, 200, 300. And then within that nested array, I have another array of values 2000 and 3000. So I have a nested array here. And then I call my array.flat. That is going to return a more flat array. And as we can see, the flat method, it returns a more flat array to where I get 1, 2, 100, 200, 300. And then I still have a nested array here because this has multiple levels of nesting. We have an array within an array. So this is the array within the original array. And then this array here is actually within this kind of second level array. So we have 3 levels of arrays. We have a depth of 3 within this array. And flat, by default, it only flattens the array 1 level. So it only gets rid of this arrays at level 2, so to speak. But we can fix that to where if I pass in a value here, it tells flat how many levels of nesting to get rid of. So if I pass in a number greater than or equal to the levels I have in my array, and I run this, you can see that now the flattened array, it doesn't have any nested arrays. It just says 1, 2, 100, 200, 300, 2000, 3000, 3, 4, all in a flattened array, but it does not mutate the original array. So you still have your original array, and then you can call .flat, pass in the number of levels. By default, it just does 1 level of flattening, and then it does not mutate the original array. And then moving on from that, we have the reverse method. So reverse reverses an array. It does not sort the array. So this isn't a reverse sort. It is just reversing this array. So as we can see here, my array 1, 2, 3, and 4, if I call reverse on it, and let me first clear my console. If I call reverse on it, I get 4, 3, 2, 1. And then you can see it does mutate the original array. So reverse, it mutates the original array and it just reverses the elements of this array, but it does not sort it. So reverse, pretty straightforward. It does exactly what the name suggests. Now at number 13 here, we have a little bit more complex of a method. It is the .find method on an array. And this basically, the find method, it takes an argument that is a function. So the .find method, this is called a higher order function. We'll cover those in more depth in future videos, but it takes a method that is a function and it returns the value that is found in the function based on whatever function you passed in. So if that makes 0 sense right now, let me run through an example. So here I have an array called myArray, and then I have a function called find number greater than 3. It takes a value and then it returns a true false Boolean. So I return value is greater than 3. If that is true, it's going to return true. If that is false, it's going to return false. And then here I call myArray.find and I pass in my function. So it takes a function here and the function should return true or false. And the first time that your function returns true, it's going to return the value into whatever variable you want. So here, if I run this, we can see the found value is 4, but it does not mutate the original array. The original array stays the same, but it will return the first value that returns true within the function that you pass. So in my array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the first value that is greater than 3 is the value of 4. Now you can do the very same thing with an inline function. You don't need to kind of declare your own functions for these. You can actually just call myArray.find. And one thing that I didn't cover in this function declaration is that the .find method will actually pass every value of the array, and then alongside that value, it will pass the index of that value as the second argument, and then it also passes the original array. So you could do something here like, okay, if the original array .length is greater than 0, so if there are values in my original array, and then if the value is greater than 3 and the index is greater than 1, return true. And we assign that to found value here. And here we can see the value is the same. This value is greater than index 1 and it is greater than 3. But what if I say, give me the index must be greater than 0, 1, 2, 3. So value 4 here is at index 3. So I'm going to say, give me a value, or let's have the index be greater than 3 here. And I run that, and you can see I get 5. So here in this condition, I make sure that the value that is passed is at an index greater than 3. So sometimes this can be useful in the .find method to use the index of the value as well as potentially the original array. Most of the time, you can just use the first argument here, the value, but every once in a while, it does help to use that index. And then even more rare is to need to use the original array, but I could see use cases in which that could be helpful. Okay, so that is the .find method. You also have a very similar method called find index, in which it does the very same thing as find, but instead of returning the value, it returns the index. So what I have going on here is I have my array declared here with a certain number of values, and then I have a find index function that I want to return true if the value is greater than 3, and then I call my array.find index and I pass in my function. So it's going to return the index of the first value that is greater than 3. So if we look through this array, the first value that is greater than 3 is number 4 here, which is at index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I should see 7 here, and it doesn't mutate the original array. So the found index is 7, and then it does not mutate the original array. Now, what if I pass in a value here, a value greater than 6? Well, I don't have a value in my array that's greater than 6. So if I run that, it returns a -1. Just like the index of method, if the index doesn't exist, the find index method returns -1. And then you can do the very same thing with an inline function, as I said earlier, or as we discussed earlier, with the .find method. You can call myArray.findIndex. It passes the value, the index, in the original array, and then we can use some condition to return true. So this is going to have the very same output of index 7, because that is the first value that is greater than 3, and it also has an index greater than 1, and we could use that index in different ways as well. So that is find and find index. And then the last two methods are going to be sum and every. So the sum method, it takes a function just like find and find index, and it returns if some values return true for that callback. So here I have my array, and then I have a function called our sum values greater than 3, and then I have, okay, let's return true if that value is greater than 3. So here I call myArray.sum, and I pass in my callback function. And as we can see in my array, I do have values greater than 3. So this should return true because I do have some values greater than 3. If my callback function ever returns true, it's going to return true for this sum call. So here, has numbers greater than 3 is true, and it does not mutate the original array. Now, if I do greater than 6 here, you'll see that I don't have values greater than 6. So we get has numbers greater than 3 is false. Now you can do the very same thing with an inline function here. to where the dot sum method to your function, it will pass the value, each value of your array. So it passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It calls this function separately with each value. And then it also will pass the index in the original array, just like the find and find index methods. So here we look for a value greater than 3, return true. We're going to see we get the same output. It does have values greater than 3. And then just like before, if I pass a value that isn't in there, we get false because it doesn't have any values that are greater than 3. So array.sum, there aren't some values greater than 3, so it returns false. And then we have a very similar method for our 16th and final method. It takes a callback and it returns if every value in the array returns true for the callback function that you passed. So I have my array 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I have a function, are all values greater than 3? I return true if the value is greater than 3. So we call .every on my array, and I pass in my callback function of are all values greater than 3? And here we can expect that the return value that is going to be 4, because as it passes every value of this array, well, even this first value, it's not greater than 3. So we would expect this to return false. Not all values are greater than 3. Now, are all values greater than 0 here? Yeah, they are. So I get true. And it does not mutate the original array. And you can do the very same thing with a callback function here to where it will pass the value, index, and original array for every value that exists in this array. And then I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm returning true if the value is greater than 3. And then you could use the index in the original array in some other way there. But as you can see, I get false. Not every value is greater than 3, but is every value greater than 0 within my array? And does every value have an index greater than -1? Well, this should be true. Every value is greater than 0, and every index has an index more than -1, as they are zero-based indexes of arrays. So here, the .every function, it will pass in every value of the array that you call this function on. So myArray.every, it's going to pass every value of my array, as well as the index in the original array. And if your function that you pass in returns true for every value, it will return true. Else, it's going to return false. So that was a rundown of 16 different array methods in JavaScript that I think are useful to know of. Are you going to use these all the time? No, you're not. But are there use cases that come up pretty regularly that it's useful to know of these methods? Yes. So I think that will definitely help you out in the future. Stay tuned for videos on map, filter, reduce, and sort. Some of those work similar to like find and find index with a callback function, but I'll cover those in future videos. All right. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in that next one.